Welcome, everybody, to the CMS Book Club. This is Roxanne Gardner, and we're here to talk today about a book by the title of Awkward Silences and How to Prevent Them. The author is Patrick King. And what I'd like to do today is to do a little whip around. Pitch me a tagline. If you were going to try to sell this book, what would that sound like? Just to break the ice, I'll go first. I'm the executive director of the Center for Medical Simulation. So I'm here in Boston on the waterfront. I would say this is not rocket science, but it underscores a number of key ways to be a good conversationalist and to help you facilitate and bring out the hero conversationalist in the other person that you're speaking with. Benjamin.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gardner. My name is Benjamin. I'm the CMS fellow right now. If I were to say one thing for the book,
I see what you did there.
yeah. So that is what I would have to say or not say anything, because we're all pretty uncomfortable when the silence is a bit too long. And and that was something that has fascinated me. What do I do now?
James.
So I'm James Lipshaw. I am the Assistant Director of Instructional Design at CMS, and I feel that it's relevant to say that I'm a former professional English teacher. I hold 4 professional licenses for K through 5 and 5 through 12 English literature and English language teaching in the state of Massachusetts. And I don't normally go in that level of depth of my credentials, but I want that to be what I'm bringing to bear when I say my tagline for this book is some men will write a 147-page self-help book instead of going to therapy.
That would make me buy the book.
Oh, well, Mary.
Hi, everybody. Mary Fay. I am coming to you today from Baden, Maryland, which is a town of probably 300 people. If I wanted to sell this book, what would I say? Silences aren't awkward. They're important.
Hi, everyone. Grace Ng here. I'm the Senior Director overseeing Faculty Development Programs, also branded Atlas. So you asked for a tagline, and one you shall get. Talk with me, don't talk at me. Tagline and the sub-tagline is remember the human being at the other end of the conversation. I will toss it over to my dear friend Yvette.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to see you. I'm at the University of Miami Gordon Center. My thinking is along the same lines as Grace. Listen well and tell good stories, both of which are things that I am always working on. Like getting out of my own brain, and it's 500 directions it's going when I'm having conversations, to actually just be present and listen.
Great. Hey, Vet, thank you. So nice to see you. And I see one other person here, Saqib. I'll go to you in a second. So I'm Jenny Rudolph. I'm the Senior Director of Innovation here at the Center for Medical Simulation. And I would say awkward silences are like the mud that grows beautiful lotuses. You need them to get yourself motivated to listen and connect. So I will toss the ball to Saqib Dara.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Saqib Dara. I am a former fellow at the CMS, and I'm very happy to be back here. I don't have a great tagline, but I think just like my capstone project, stop before crossing, I think awkward silences are also like a slow before talking kind of thing. So I just have that kind of parallel in my mind.
So I want to sum up something that I heard from, I think, 4 folks, which I'm in extreme agreement with, which is basically a rejection of the fundamental premise of the book, which is that silences are awkward and that silence is something that needs to be fixed. And I know for me, my reaction to reading a lot of it was, I want this author as a human being to be more comfortable sitting with silence, being okay with it being silent, not worrying about winning or losing a conversation or succeeding or failing in a personal interaction, and just thinking about the person that they're talking with and where to go next.
And that little silence that we just had could, for example, have represented all of us soaking up what you were just saying, James, and thinking about how to build on it. So the fertility of silence might be one of the things that we return to here. That being said, if I were funnier and cleverer, I could apply the skills from chapter 5, where you amplify and reverse something to make it funnier, like certainly the fertility of silence. Somebody could do something good with that if they were.
An OBGYN?
Yeah, there you go.
Well, this was inspired, this recommendation of this book was inspired by Benjamin. It would be great if you could share more about maybe some areas of the book that really captured your attention.
Thanks so much, Dr. Gardner. I was just, when I got the chance to kind of sit back as an observer of the HSC courses, then I would notice like times whereby like there will be like so much long pauses in the crowd. And like internally, I would perceive it as an awkward silence. And was wondering like, what do we do with this? Do we do anything? Like, when do we do something about it? Like at a 10-second mark, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, like what do we do? And like, is this something that, can we prevent it? And like, should we even prevent it? So like, so many thoughts. And I was like, somebody must have thought about this before and maybe written a book. But then as I continued reading it, I realized like, I may not fully agree with everything, but I didn't think it was completely useless as well, because some of it does help to facilitate good conversations, and are some things that we practice even like, like establishing rapport, making sure you listen well, and then that will facilitate the conversations. Those were my initial thoughts, but I think as time went on, and even after I finished reading the book, I realized like awkward silences is kind of like the perception of the person who's observing the silence. To other people, they may not even find it awkward. In fact, that silence may be, it's because they need time to process what is happening. And some people are very happy with the silence. And just because it's quiet, it doesn't mean that people are not engaged or not learning. Some people just learn differently, and silence is actually okay. So at the end of the day, I realized like, awkward silence need not be awkward. It may just be, good silence.
Benjamin, I want to double click on exactly what you said, this idea that whether a silencer is awkward or not is completely meaning that is created in your own mind and is not necessarily anything to do with any like reality that exists outside of you and your brain. People pulling out their phones is a sign that you've failed. That's a quote from the book. I know, Benjamin, you're someone who takes notes on your phone. So I think if I were this person and you were in my class, I might have a bad reaction to someone who's just taking notes using a tool, right? It's like, I haven't failed because someone's taking notes.
I think I'll be quite amused when he tries to pull out all his 25 tactics on me because I'm taking notes. And I'll just continue being silent and just continue taking notes just to see him do it.
There's a number of things that I was thinking about with respect to debriefings that I've been involved in or have facilitated. There are always those situations where you might put forth a question, ask folks to be reflective and share, and it's just quiet. And it took a while to be able to sit with that quiet and just have like this pregnant pause. And eventually a birthing conversation would emerge. It was definitely something that was internal to me, but it was evident that no one was talking. And the urge is to try to fill that void. And the challenge is just sitting with it and letting people think and letting someone rise up and start talking. And eventually other people chime in.
I think the pathologizing of silences has happened way before the advance of cell phones and handheld devices. I feel like it's a cultural, anthropological phenomenon, that in certain cultures, silence is pathology. The sign that something is wrong, the social interaction is wrong, the people are wrong,
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think even in my own culture, as I'm, Cantonese and culture, if you're sitting there by yourself in silence, tons of people would come over and ask you if you're sick. you know,
I would second that.
which is great. It's so caring, right? So, right. So, Ben, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, but I feel like a great part of it is cultural. And I don't know if I'm supposed to mention a different book in a book club about this book, but I
Oh,
feel
please
like,
do. Yeah.
yeah, thank you, James, for the permission. I feel like I've read the book Quiet by Susan Cain that came out in, I believe, 2012. To me, that is a much more effective book in terms of describing the value and power of silence and reflection and introversion and how that makes an impact in the world. I think this book provides a formula. It is valuable, a formula for people who have not had the chance to develop this skill to have a conversation. I see huge value in that. I think this book doesn't talk about the impact of silence that much. It talks about the impact of saying the wrong things, but to me, that's not silence.
I feel like I could jump in here and just share a little bit, quick overview of what I thought was sort of charming and useful about the book, and also potentially very good for us who lead learning conversations. One thing I really liked was, I think, the author's commitment to connection throughout the book and listening very carefully to what were people bringing up. So chapter 1, which he calls setting the tone, I would sort of think of as pre-briefing for us. And, when I came out as gay when I was in my 20s, I remember one of my roommates in college said, "Jenny, you set the tone for how people react to this." So remember, this was like 1981. Okay, so it was very not cool to be gay yet. And she said, when you bring it up in a really awkward, kind of diffident way, people feel awkward and diffident. And when you walk into the room and you're like, "Hey, I'm Jenny, this is my girlfriend," and act like, of course, everybody should be perfectly happy and normal with that, it kind of sets a tone. And so I liked his approach that you kind of start a cycle of how people are interacting with you. If you're warm and friendly when you walk into a cocktail party, or if you're warm and welcoming when you start a debrief, that kind of thing. So I thought that was reasonable. The second chapter was really, what I loved about it was listening for details about what's going on with the other person. And he kind of contrasted the value of giving a very generic compliment, like, "Hey, I love your hair," or "I love your sweatshirt," or whatever, versus "Hey, Mary, is that kind of USNA sweatshirt? That is so cool. What's your connection there?" That's a much more connecting type of comment, by building on things like, or Sakib, I see you wearing a bow tie. That's so interesting. My mentor, Dan Raymer, always wore a bow tie. Tell me about that. So he's inviting us to really connect with what seems to be important to other people. And I'm just going to mention one other chapter for now. I have others that I'd love to talk about, but as you guys all know, I've been very serious and quite unsuccessful about trying to get funny. And I really enjoyed his chapter.
That works very well right there.
Thank you very
Ha ha ha.
about the witty comeback machine. And his idea there is listen carefully again, amplify what somebody says, and then reverse it or turn it on yourself or whatever. I saw the value of this book primarily as a guide to being a good conversationalist or conversation leader in a variety of contexts.
Thematically, it's a lot of the things that we encourage when we're doing instructor courses, right? I mean, he talks about curiosity, he talks about really listening, summarizing, some of the things that we inherently do, which is good conversation, in general. And I think, so much of what we do in debriefing and in teaching, and especially in simulation-based teaching, is about all those conversations. The last year I've taken my whole team through thanks for the feedback and difficult conversations and all of this. And I think this falls in sort of the same realm of, what are some of the skill sets and tools that we can use in these settings. And obviously we can also use them in our personal in our personal lives, but I think especially with what we do, which is how to have conversations, how to hold conversations, how to truly listen and guide. It's not the easiest of things to do at times, and so I think having a bag of tricks, per se. And by the way, Jenny, I thought you were really funny. You made me smile twice, so that's pretty good, right? But really, I mean, using lightness and humor, I get that completely, because I feel like so much of what we do is it's serious, and we're passionate about it, which makes us more serious. There are some useful things in here, even though I agree with what everyone said. The idea that you have to bridge every silence is not necessarily something that we should or want to do. And back to what everyone has said, reflection is so important, and we are sort of allowed so little, down, peaceful, quiet time to do it. So if that's part of something we can do, or if someone said something really important, to be able to just sit with that or think about it, it's incredible.
Yeah, one of the things, Yvette, that we talk about a lot in our sort of curriculum design conversations is, what do you need to say to people who are like novices with a skill? So if we were talking about like novice conversationalists, or people who are really struggling to get people to be interested in what they're saying, or to have conversations that really seem to flow and last and don't peter out. And I think on the level of action coaching, the book contains a number of useful actions, ideas, ways that you can keep a conversation going. So, like for basics, or for sort of prescriptive practice, like, hey, here's ways that you can make a conversation move. There were some really useful nuggets, as Jenny pointed out as well. And then at the frames level, that was where I started to get concerned that there were a few frames around silences, frames around what is the point of conversations, or frames around what is happening for the other person in a conversation when they're not speaking back to me, that I think were potentially disabling for a learner who might be trying to learn how to have this kind of conversation from the book. One thing that I read that I wrote down in detail as an example of this was there was a bit of a second person like paragraph talking to a you, i.e., you, the person reading this book, and it said, "You are trying to determine whether something is acceptable. You're not entirely comfortable and are afraid of rejection. You don't want to look stupid by being immediately contradicted or wrong." And I was like, I had to read this for work, bro. I don't feel any of those things.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's interesting, James. What you're saying, I think, goes to the stance of how this guy or others of us enter a conversation. And I'll just give an example. In chapter 6, which he calls conversational diversity, and he says you need to switch up what you do. Like if you tell a lot of stories, you need to switch up and switch to analogies, or use hypothetical questions, or, basically mix it up. The whole stance, though, is almost like a boxer holding up her gloves or his gloves, like I'm always ready to parry and thrust and punch and avoid. And I'm not going to get in a situation where I take a big swing and I miss and I look like an idiot. What we think a lot about regarding awkward silences is when those happen because somebody accidentally took a swing and a miss. I guess he's worried about that. And people feel uncomfortable, or psychological safety is undermined. So anyway, I'd love to just build on kind of what you said, James, in terms of shifting to what are actually consequential awkward silences. I'm going to give an example, and then I'd love to hear, what you guys maybe think about awkward silences in our work. So 25 years ago or something, I was at Christmas in one of my family homes. Not that I have many homes, but I was invited to my relative's home. And there was like a knockdown, drag out, horrible fight over the Christmas goose. And there was like this dead silence around the table. Like we were all sitting there just completely upset or cowed, or like us kids were like, and my great aunt from Germany said, "Excuse me, could somebody please pass the cookies?" And then she said, "I don't really want any. I'm just trying to break the awkward silence."
Oh,
Oh, that was
oh, she's a
perfect.
genius.
Of course, we all started laughing. But I know, I've had those feelings in like a debriefing where like I say something so wrong or somebody else does something so wrong and it's excruciating. And then there's the recovery and the repair. I feel like this book is more about prevention than repair.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know how you guys
Yeah.
think about that, but.
Well, it does take me back to a moment, Jenny, and I actually share this when I'm doing the debrief of the debrief, or the actual original debrief in of our cases. But we talk about with our participants, our learners, some ways to get out of a situation where you started off a wrong path in your conversation and you come out with a GWIT, guess what I'm thinking? And I share the story about, I sort of grew up under Jenny's tutelage. And one day when I was co-debriefing with her, she came out with a GWIT and I went, "Oh my God," internally. It's like, it's a GWIT. Oh my goodness, what's she going to do? And then Jenny did this really smooth thing where she said, "That didn't sound quite right. Let me just roll that back and try again." And it was so brilliant. It was so masterful and it was so simple. And so I invited them to try that on if they found themselves in a similar situation, because it has worked for me.
Yeah, I think when folks are a little on the internally over analytical side, you can, have a lot more thoughts about yeah, this team, right?
Who
You can
could
have a
that
lot
be that you're talking about?
a lot more thoughts about your own performance than other people are having about it. And it's exactly that moment, right? Like when it happens in real time, you can just say, "Hey, let me rewind that for a second. That didn't come out the way that I wanted." Wow, what a great skill to be able to bring to interpersonal conversations as well. If I'm ever say up at night thinking about something awkward I said when I was 13 years old, not that that ever happens to me now as a 36-year-old. Uh, yeah, to be able to have said in that moment, "Hey, that didn't come out quite the way that I meant it. Let me try again."
So, another thing that really spoke to me was the notion of being socially fluent in one context and a bumbling, not fool, but implied in a different context. And I would say, as I was getting started in the whole simulation learning curve and teaching, debriefing, pre-briefing, um, it, there was just so much that I had felt comfortable with in my clinical world and my clinical realm. And I trained with midwives, and they were always talking about listen to women, the importance of listening. So that's sort of how what I brought into my simulation experiences. And I just, it took a shift of, the way that I practice clinically and how I interact with respect to how I interact with people within our courses, how I intentionally aim to be genuinely curious and hold my basic assumption and try to bring out the best in people as we're going forward, or bring out their thoughts, their true thoughts and feelings. So we have something to talk about and share and learn from. So I was wondering, so Saqib, you're in the UAE, and I just was really curious about, silence. Is that awkward? Is it embraced? How do you experience that?
So this is a very interesting question. Thank you so much, Roxanne, for that. So the idea is, so I just kind of skimmed through the book, but I really loved it because it kind of gave me like a kind of a roadmap for conversations, like a structure and anatomy of it, and how to navigate it. And so what you're asking is like, how is it in different cultural contexts? So here, like in the Middle East, actually, so it's again a very multicultural society. But within the local culture, silence is actually very much like a prominent part of the conversation. I mean, people are not talking all the time, so it's not quite awkward, like in the awkward silences way. So in many of the local conversations, so people sit in big groups, and silence is actually the norm rather than the awkward moments of it. So how would I apply that to that one? I think I will have to reflect a bit more. But I really loved the way he talks about how the conversation is going, how the structure is, and as Jenny was alluding to earlier, to prevent those awkward silences and kind of how to repair them. So it's a more like a conscious awareness and those kind of things while you are in the conversation. That's what I kind of enjoyed most in all this. But I think it's really fascinating that in some other cultures, how it works out where the silence is actually a norm and not so awkward.
As I think we would say in some of the like Curious Now work, Jenny, the labeling of a silence as awkward is a judgment. And so that, those judgments are obviously personal, and then every judgment that you have is linked to a standard. We would say like sometimes a hidden standard. And so the standard might be, right, if nobody talks for X number of seconds, then the conversation has gotten too stolid or whatever, versus if it's normal for us to sit around in a big group and people really take 30, 45, 60 seconds to think about what they're going to say next, then we might be less likely to apply that judgment to it. One thing this was bringing up for me, especially with that like labeling of these silences or the judging of the silences, was this sort of joke that we have in my family, which is if you're in, say, a play or a conversation or a debriefing or a simulation or whatever, right? Like there's three things that you can say in any given moment when it's your turn. The best one is your line, like the line you're supposed to say. The second best one is anything else. And then the third and the worst one is line. And the labeling of the conversation or of the silence as awkward is saying line, because you're giving up on the possibility that this can be any other form of thing. You could say a line, you could say anything, or you could say this is awkward. And that third option is so much worse than anything that could come out of any of the other two paths.
And James, that really connects with the subtext of this whole book, in my view, which is around co-creating conversations. He talks about improvisation. He talks about association, like when you say X, it makes me think of Y. And so I think that's that option too. Instead of I don't know exactly where I'm going to go in this debriefing, but I might make an analogy or tell a story that's relevant. I have a question for Benjamin about his initial framing and interest in this book, if that's cool. So Benjamin, I heard you mention that you heard silences in the Healthcare Simulation Essentials course, and I interpreted from what you said that you read some of them as awkward silences. And I know for myself and Mary Fay, who I was teaching with, and Grace Eng, who I was teaching with, we often use silence very purposely and judiciously. And I recognize, my personal 12-second limit for silences is often quite uncomfortable for some people. But I don't interpret them myself as awkward, but I do interpret your thoughts as finding them awkward. And I'm very interested in that because I think how it lands on people can be very different for different people. So what propelled your thinking? How did they land on you? Talk to me a little bit about that.
So I was thinking quite a few things. I think the biggest thing I have is to, number one, how to even interpret the silence. Because like you can have silence for like so many different reasons. It could be like we said something that triggered deep thought in the participants, so they are thinking about like different things and they need time. It could also be the fact that like we didn't quite frame the question well, and hence they are trying to figure out the question in the first place, and hence there's that silence. So like to me, it's like there's so many reasons why there's silence. So like how do we know whether or not in the first place, like is it because like of something I didn't say well and hence there's silence? Or did I say something really well, just that they need time to process it? Yeah, I'm just thinking like, silence has like so many ways of perceiving it. And how do I approach it? Yeah, so I did come to a conclusion that not all silence is bad, but it isn't always good as well. Like if I were to do a guess what I'm thinking question, I would get a silence. And that may not be a great silence. It may just be like I could have structured it better. So yeah, so to me, the more I think about it, the more uncharted the territory gets.
And I love all of that, especially as it relates to our teaching, Benjamin, is I know my perspective, I know the data that I can observe, but I can't know what's happening in your head. How are you seeing this, right, as my conversational partner here?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even something just like saying, so after, 15 seconds have gone by, what's going on for you here? Not necessarily to get the answer to the question you asked, but to diagnose, like, do you need more time to think about this? Are you in the middle of a really deep reflection? Is this really personal, so you're not sure whether you want to share? So it's not even a thought problem, it's interpersonal, like, I don't know whether I want to say the answer that I came to, or is it I didn't understand what you were asking me to do?
And what is the answer to that question, Ben? Because that was exactly the question on my head as I was listening. I'm like, so how do we diagnose? How do we diagnose the silence?
Sometimes I feel like it'll be great when we have a buddy with us to kind of like observe us.
Who could be like, that was a terrible question, Ben.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I think that helps. That really helps because sometimes in the moment we are so in that conversation, we're thinking about different things. We didn't even realize that the way we frame that question like isn't helping our participant. So which is why like one of the things I thought was interesting in the book was that when he mentioned about how those sports commentators like set up the athlete who's really, really tired for success when they reply them. They kind of like, I realized in the second quarter, you did this and then you threw that pass and then like it was behind the back, but you did this instead of that. And realize, hey, that's like kind of what we're doing in the pale. Like we address it to you, we set this action and that result. And then like you invite that person, oh yeah, I can follow that. And then they will talk. So I did feel like, hey, that is kind of like what we're doing. So the question is like, which are the silences that are like as a result of us not doing that properly, and hence people are like struggling to follow. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say a really good co-debriefer and body language is also helpful. And then of course what James said, which is actually naming it and asking, right, which is always helpful. And I think we forget to do that even in, sort of in the silences. But if everyone looks at you like, what are you trying to ask us? That's always a good sign that perhaps we just made it really muddy for them.
Yeah.
A room full of squints and head tilts is a pretty clear symptom there. Yeah.
I love the synergy in how we've approached this book, and yet diversity in how we've received this book and what are the various takeaways that people have shared. And James, just the notion that, not all silences are awkward or should be avoided. They're sometimes very fruitful and useful. And I think there are things that Benjamin and Jenny brought out and Yvette brought out that were very similar minded. Even the notion of how do we diagnose these moments? What are some of the techniques we might be able to use to be a better conversationalist and bring out a better conversationalist in the person that you're talking with? So those are the things I think that resonated for me. Any other final thoughts from my colleagues?
I just really appreciated everybody coming at this with different assumptions, inferences, and frames about the value of silence. I think that really helped me reconceptualize the book from silence equals bad to silence equals many meanings and many types of value.
I was considering in editing just having you have that final question, Roxanne, and then leaving like 45 seconds of silent runtime with no one responding to it.
Sounds
But I think Benjamin already made that joke.
Great.
Okay, everybody. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, attention, your ability to digest this book and to share your thoughts and perspectives. Have a great day.